Hello everyone, this is Ruben Rodriguez with SSH Communications Security. I thank you for taking the time today to join us for our latest webinar in the monthly series that we've been doing. This is the fourth in the webinar series, as you can see on the screen now. We today will be going a little bit over what we discussed in the past webinars, but then also rounding things out here with the myth of SSH Key Management as part of the Privileged Access Management paradigm, a critical aspect to how keys are actually identified and managed. With that being said, I'd like to take care of just a couple of housekeeping items, and then I'll introduce our presenters and we'll get this underway. First and foremost, if you do have any questions during the presentation today, please do use the webinar questions function, and we will do all we can to get those questions answered for you at the end of the presentation. Another one is we will be kicking off a brand new series starting next month. Please stay tuned for that. It's going to go into a lot of great details, as these webinars have been kind of priming everyone to what needs to happen with SSH keys. The next round in the series will go into what actually that entails in terms of having a project in place and managing those keys on an ongoing basis. And we've got a lot of experience with that, given all the customers that we help on a day-to-day basis, and we continue to help. And one last thing I'd like to cover before we kick it off. I did get an interesting note here from one of our followers via Twitter about this webinar, and we actually take pride in it, whereby it came from Mr. R. Jones SX. It's at R. Jones SX, and he said, "This by far wins, as it's the nerdiest webinar title he's ever seen." Well, we take pride in our nerdiness here at SSH Communication Security, and I'm sure as Matthew, who's one of the presenters, can attest to, he can even speak more to that, as he works in the Helsinki office, and he can give you insight into that. We like to follow all our social handles. If you like to follow us, you can follow us on Twitter at SSH or via our LinkedIn profile page. All that being said, let's kick this off now. I'd like to first introduce Joe Scaff, who will be here to help and support with any kind of questions you might have. Joe Scaff is our Director of Global Customer Services, and he's responsible for managing all of our global technical sales, support, and professional services. And he has an extensive career and over 12 years alone in the information technology space. The key presenter for today will be Mr. Matthew McKenna. He's our Chief Strategy Officer with over 15 years of high-tech sales, marketing, and management experience. And he's responsible for a number of activities, all that not just being related to revenue, but of course, thought leadership, awareness, and giving presentations like this today to help educate all of you on what you can do to help manage your SSH keys. With that being said, I would like to turn it over now to you, Matthew, and please take it away. Thank you.
Thanks, Ruben. Good afternoon, everyone. And again, thank you for taking the time to join us today. At R. Jones X, you know, we did maybe go a bit over the top on the nerdiness of this title here, but this is really a good one that we're going to talk about today. The myth of SSH key management as part of the privileged access management paradigm. You may be thinking to yourself, what in the world is this about? So let's get into it without further ado. So what are we going to cover today? There are 3 pillars to comprehensive user key and access management. Unfortunately, there's one of these pillars that is really very much ignored in the entire process about how we go about managing SSH user key-based trust in our environment. And so we're going to pinpoint in on that one. And it's going to really highlight why this is a lot more than just a privileged access management issue in the market space. As a second part, we're going to cover why traditional PAM solutions out there in the market space don't really effectively solve the challenges at hand. And we're going to kind of go into this from a philosophy perspective of how these solutions are architected, how they've been architected historically, and how they're in some ways not really ready for the future. And then finally, we're going to talk a little bit about the emerging paradigm around the DevOps space. Access has to become a just-in-time enabler, and why aren't current PAM architectures well suited for this? So this is kind of what we're going to go in today, and from this you're going to kind of get to play around with some thoughts in your own mind as we're talking today. Why, you know, maybe it is a myth that SSH user key management is a small subsegment of the privileged access management space at this time from the perspective of analysts. And we're going to challenge that thinking today. Very quickly, who is SSH Communication Security? SSH Communication Security has been around since 1995, so we're on our 20th birthday. It was founded by the inventor of the SSH protocol, Tatsu Ullinen, who is actually our chief executive officer today. Now, SSH, we evolved from this encryption protocol, and we're going to talk about that in a second as well, what this actually meant and why this issue of SSH user key management is now such an evolving topic in the identity and access management space, the cryptography space, the configuration management space. We are a publicly traded company on the Helsinki NASDAQ, over 3,000 customers globally, and of course the original source of the open SSH protocol. Now, over the last couple of years, we've kind of evolved into an access management company, and we're focused on a couple of areas here: privilege access control, SSH user key management, which is the topic of these webinars, which we've been having over the last couple of weeks, and encrypted channel monitoring. And of course, from our core and their basis of where we come from, data in transit encryption. And now there's two other areas which we've been slowly moving into, if you've been following us from RSA, is that we've been starting to make a move into the certificate management space, and we're also starting to move into the secrets management for DevOps, because this is really a space where this area of SSH user key management, privilege access control, is really becoming a relevant topic, and is going to become a more and more important topic as we go forward over the next several years as this, let's say, this evolution and this migration into cloud environments comes. So this is all going to play in together, and this is what we're dedicated fully to do for our customers, is manage the challenges our customers have around SSH user key management. Now, if you look at this title on this slide, I actually saw a movie a couple weeks ago called The Big Short. Absolutely loved it. It was based on the premise of Michael Burry back in 2005 already, foreseeing the financial crash of the 2008 stock market due to the subprime mortgages that had been sold at a AAA level in the market space, and these were being bought up by people in the market. And he saw essentially well in advance that the market could not sustain itself and was going to crash. And I'm not a big person into fear and uncertainty and doubt, and neither was Michael Burry. Michael Burry was actually pointing out facts to the market space and saying, this is what this is about and this is what's going to happen. Now, we may be overplaying our hand here a little bit, calling SSH the Big Short, but let me make a case for it here for a second. I'm going to do a little 101 because we are a little bit of a nerdy company, a little bit tech-oriented. I'm going to just give a quick briefing about the SSH protocol, and then I'm going to talk about why SSH is potentially a big short when it comes to the IT security landscape. First, there are 3 layers to the SSH protocol. Very simple. There's something called a host authentication layer. This essentially is what allows the SSH client on the left side to talk to the SSH server on the right side. It lets these two machines know that they can speak with one another. Then under this, there's a user authentication layer. The user authentication layer lets us indicate that the user on this client may access this server. And then finally, there's a third layer to the SSH protocol called the subchannels of the protocol. And this is where the nasty things happen within our environments. These are the things that we don't see going on in the encryption. Now, what are some examples of this? One example is tunneling. Essentially, with tunneling, individuals, when they have access, using potentially username, password, key-based authentication, whatnot, they can go from their desktop into, let's say, a dev environment, a test environment, and from there, they can use tunneling to tunnel across over to a production server. After they've gained access into that production server, they essentially can drop in a new key pair, and from that point forward, access directly from their desktop over into the production environment. This is something that we see all the time out in the market space, a very common misuse. Another one is the possibility of using tunneling or agent forwarding or these type of other subchannels of the protocol and moving or exfiltrating data, bypassing firewall rules, and moving data outside the enterprise back to our home desktop potentially. Again, these are the things that we don't have good control of in the environment where the misuse of the protocol is widespread. And it's not because administrators are bad people or malicious actors. It's just that they want to get their job done. They want to get their job done quickly. Now, why is SSH potentially the big short? SSH is what we call the known unknown. If you go back into your company and you ask the question, who owns SSH inside our company? Most people will shrug and kind of give a funny look. Well, that's just something the Unix guys do, they'll say. And that's the way SSH has been treated over the last 10 to 15 years. It's just something that the Unix guys do. It's something that the application owners use to do their job. Now, the SSH protocol has two basic functions. One is remote administrative access. One is secure file transfer. Those are the two primary use cases of the SSH protocol. It is used everywhere. It comes pre-installed on every single Unix Linux box out there. It is the primary means of access to the majority of our networks devices. That's our routers, that's our switches, that's our firewall. It sits on 60% of the world web servers. It sits in the motherboard of our computer. It is used to access devices everywhere. SSH is everywhere. Why is it the big short? Again, going back to that, we sit there and we say, this is sitting in the world of the Unix underworld. If we ask our C-level executives, do you know what SSH is? No, probably not. If we go to the PKI teams, now if we talk to the PKI guys and we say, hey, do you guys manage SSH user key-based access? Most frequently they'll say, no, that actually hasn't been in our remit. You know, that we manage certificates, we manage public key infrastructure, but we don't manage SSH user key-based access. So SSH is a little bit the unwanted stepchild in the IT infrastructure. And why is that? Because it's just worked. It's just been there. It was born as an encryption protocol. And what we forgot in that process is that it provides access. Millions of credentials in our environment which are currently unmanaged. Is it the big short? Potentially. It could become that. It can become an issue of risk. It can become an issue of compliance. And it certainly can become an issue of resilience in our environment. SSH equals access, most likely unmanaged access. Now, when we go out and we discover trust relationships in our own customers' environments, if we're looking at a 10,000 Unix Linux host environment, we're looking at upward, in most cases, of over 1 million SSH user keys for application-to-application connectivity. And we'll see about maybe 100,000 on for interactive usage, for administrative usage, database administrative usage, or system administrator usage. Now, SSH connects everything. SSH is used for our on-premise connectivity. Our administrators will use that, as we said, to connect to network devices, routers, switches, firewalls. It will be used to access servers, to do maintenance operations. It will be used primarily to move data around from machine to machine, from application to application. It is responsible for our payment processing systems. Our point-of-sale systems use SSH. Our major trading systems in our environment use SSH. Our SAP systems, our Oracle database, all use SSH as an access point. Now, as we think about this evolution, these two use cases of remote access management and machine-to-machine file transfer, this extends itself now into the world of our cloud, right? We're moving our operations into the cloud. And again, how are we accessing? How are we moving data into the cloud very frequently? We're using SFTP. Also, how are our remote administrators accessing things in the cloud very often? They're using SSH. And now with the intertwined supply chain, we have vendors coming into our on-premise environment. We have them coming into our cloud environment. We have them sending file transfers on-premise and into our cloud environment. We're not inspecting these. We're not controlling these. We're not controlling the key-based authentication. So SSH equals access equals most likely unmanaged access. Now let's take this one more step further before we continue. Now let's take this for a very simple use case here. Think about this. When a contractor will join your company, most likely they will go through an HR process. HR will check them out. They will get through that process. They will be onboarded into the environment. They'll be put into our identity access management system, whether that's maybe an Oracle, a SailPoint, CyberArk, whatever it is that you're potentially using there to manage this access. Now, this person will then be issued credentials, a username, and a password. They will be put into our Active Directory. Now, this is a contractor who's going to be doing administrative work in the Unix environment. They start to join into their work, daily work. They're given their computer, and off they go. They start to set up SSH user keys everywhere. 3 months later, this individual now leaves the organization. Their contract's done. We take them out of Active Directory and LDAP. We get their computer, their username and password are revoked, and we call them off-boarded. Well, what did we forget? We forgot all these other credentials called the SSH user keys. And with those SSH user keys, this individual potentially still has access to the environment What does this equate to in real life? Let's take a look at a case study here. This is some data from a significant financial organization where we just did a subset of this is a 30,000 Unix host environment. We just did a small subset of 6,750 hosts here. Essentially, what we found across this was quite significant and of interest. And we can say that what we're finding here is the rule rather than the exception. Across those 6,750 hosts, we found 22,930 users. And there was a private key to public key ratio of 1 to 9. That meant 9,500 private keys and 65,000 public keys. Now let's just talk about a couple of the items here which are really of interest. When we found the private keys out there, so we found 9,500 private keys, 97% of those had no passphrase around them. So that means they did not have any second factor of security around those. So if those private keys are picked up, they can be utilized very easily. That was one. Now, when we looked at the authorized keys across the environment, now remember, the authorized keys are the locks to the doors. The private keys are your personal credential, your key to your house. Authorized keys are the locks to the door. We found that in 68% of the authorized keys in the environment, there was no source restriction. What does that mean, a source restriction? A source restriction is essentially when we can define from what IP to what destination server a process or individual may access using key-based authentication. This means that we have the possibility to lock down every single point of access in our environment using SSH user keys, using source restrictions. In this case, 68% of the keys, authorized keys, the locks to the doors, had no source restriction. Big deal. What does that mean? It essentially means that gaining access to the private key to that public key, I can continue to hop transitively across that environment using that key-based authentication because it's not locking me down to that server where I'm accessing. The next one is force commands. 99% of the keys did not have a force command. Very usable part of the SSH protocol. This comes with the SSH protocol, is you can put a force command on a key when you generate a private and public key pair. This means that you can determine already when you're generating this key pair what this access may permit. This access may only be utilized as SFTP. That is only command that can be utilized during this process or session. 99% of the keys have no force command on it. Again, that means someone can use shell commands from there if they have access again to the private key. Now, more alarming was root keys. Authorized keys for root with no source restriction was 45% of the keys. Root keys. So this means operating system level access. 45% of the authorized keys, the locks to the door, had no source restriction. That means I could jump everywhere with root access or jump very far potentially with root access on 45% of those keys. And authorized keys for root with no force command at 100%, that's normal. That's nothing to be alarmed about because you shouldn't have force commands on root. Now, we found in this environment that the key with the largest risk could actually reach 6,730 servers of the 6,750 servers. That's a significant percentage there. So this is what we see out in the market space, and this is the rule rather than the exception. And it's essentially a point which we can't really ignore anymore from a credential management concept in our overall security posture, identity access posture, cryptography posture. So let's hop into it. The myths of SSH key management is part of the privileged access paradigm, privileged access management paradigm. Myth number one, SSH key management is solely a privileged access management related issue. I have good debates with the Gartner guys on this one. Currently, this is considered a subset of privileged access management, and partially yes, but we're going to show some arguments as to why this is not 100% a privileged access management related issue. There's a little bit more to it. So we're going to talk about that, myth number one. Myth number two, traditional privileged access management solutions can solve my SSH user key management problems. There are traditional privileged access management players and vendors out there that are coming at this, extending their proxy-based technology or their vaulting technology and saying, well, we already manage passwords. Well, we can manage SSH user keys. It's just another key, and we're just going to put this into our vault, and everything's going to be okay. And we're going to talk a little bit about why these solutions are not ideally architected to solve the SSH user key problem. And then myth number three is traditional privileged access management solutions are well suited for the challenges of my future IT landscape when it comes to provisioning, deprovisioning, and recertification of SSH user key-based access. We're going to talk here about the evolving landscape, this movement into the cloud, the movement around third-party access, integrated vendor access. We're going to look at this as we talk about the evolution and the movement into DevOps, why these architectures are not ideally suited for this. So let's go into the first one. Myth number one, it's not just privileged access management. There are three components to getting SSH user key-based access under control. Absolutely, we don't argue the point that this is an access-related issue. Remember, SSH provides access, most likely unmanaged access. But there are 3 points at which SSH user key management intersects, right? So we see enterprises approaching this issue from a couple of angles. One angle is the privileged access management angle, which we just talked about, and we'll talk about some of the weaknesses of that approach in a little bit. The other angle, which we largely see, is that PKI teams are being tasked with this, that essentially the PKI teams in the past, which have been tasked to manage certificates, are also now being tasked to manage SSH user keys across the environment. And we'll talk a little bit about why PKI is not ideally suited to manage SSH user keys, or why the background and traditional experience there has not really fit perfectly into this space. And then the third and the forgotten point here is the configuration management side of things. Many times we see customers also coming at this from a configuration management perspective. They may be using an Ansible, a Chef, a Puppet. They may be considering, I'm going to go script this myself. Challenge here on this side is often the configuration management systems don't have the necessary underlying database infrastructures to manage all these processes and keys and whatnot and manage the entire state going across. They have plus sides, but they also have weaknesses. So SSH user key management and access management intersects at these 3 points, from identity access management perspective of how we provision this access, deprovision this access, and recertify this access. It comes from the PKI perspective because it's very important that these SSH user keys are following standards in terms of algorithms being used, key lengths being used, ensuring that we're not using deprecated keys of SSH1 and whatnot. So there is a PKI perspective there. However, unlike the traditional certificate management on the PKI side, SSH user keys don't have an expiration date. And this usually throws PKI teams for a loop. When they learn about this, they say, what? SSH user keys? They don't have expiration dates. This is interesting. And then on the configuration management side. So this comes together at these 3 areas. And then you see up on the left and right side, you see the encrypted access control, which is bringing the concepts of data security and identity access management together, and the DevOps space, which is bringing the areas of configuration management and access management together. So there's a lot more at play here than just privileged access management. So let's talk about the overlooked aspect. Let's talk about configuration management. And this is a little bit nerdy topic because this really goes into the heart of SSH. And this is an area which we see enterprises forgetting to look at all the time. We don't see good standardized policy configuration across the estate. Again, because this has been done in the underworld of the Unix estate, just managed by application owners on an ad hoc basis for convenience to get their job done on a day-to-day basis. So let's just look at point 4 for the sake of time here and talk about some of the things that we could do with good SSH configuration management policy. 1, we could actually restrict the sub-protocols that we talked about there. Initially, in the configuration itself, we could lock down that ability to tunnel, to use agent forwarding, to use shell commands. We actually have that possibility to already restrict the services and sub-protocols that SSH keys are utilizing with good configuration management. We can restrict SSH protocol versions. We can ensure that SSH will only be allowed to work with version 2, and SSH will not be considered as secure. And so basically we can restrict the version usage there. We can restrict root access. We can deny remote root access or only allow it through an emergency process key in the configuration itself. We can determine already what algorithms can be used in terms of the PKI side. We can define a policy that they have to be SHA-256 or higher, right? So we can allow only certain encryption algorithms being used. We can put login restrictions and timeouts, number of failed login. Hey, this now can no longer be accessed. And when we turn on verbose logging in our environments, in the configuration, we can actually see from where and how frequently SSH user keys are actually authenticating to destination server's environment, regardless of whether that's for an interactive process or whether that's for a machine-to-machine process. This, let's say, monitoring is what gives us the possibility of getting the intelligence around our environment of what is potentially a key that is no longer in use, and also what potentially are anomalies in the environment, what anomalies maybe exist out there. So configuration management is something that we can easily go back into and start to look in our environment and have in our control today to do a better job on and get a baseline policy around. Now, let's go to myth number 2. Traditional PAM can solve my SSH user key-based challenges. Let's take a look at this. What are the challenges that traditional PAM faces? Traditional PAM architectures are usually jump host architectures. They may have some vaulting around this where they have the capability to vault passwords or vault keys to some degree. But what are the tricks here? So in most cases, we see that discovery and monitoring are not integrated parts of this in terms of how we go out and we look for the trust relationships in the environment, private keys and public keys, and linking them not only to interactive usage, but also machine-to-machine usage. These are very focused, often traditional PAM solutions are very focused on the interactive usage side, the user side. Now at the beginning what we said is SSH user keys, that ratio of interactive usage to machine-to-machine usage is essentially 10% to 90%, 90% being machine-to-machine usage. And these solutions are really not ideally architected to solve the challenge on the machine-to-machine side. The approach is sensible in some ways. It maybe is a good idea to lock down our private keys in our vault, but this is where the thinking is a little bit off and from our perspective, is that it's very private key focused. It's based in, if you had joined us for the second series of the myth of the private key, is it goes from the assumption is that we can lock down access getting control of all the private keys. And as we showed in that series, it's virtually impossible to get control of all the private keys in the environment, essentially because I can put them anywhere. I can put them in a file share, I can put them on my USB stick. It's very hard to scan our environments there. The real control that we have sits on the authorized key side. Very often, these solutions require agents to be deployed. It's very cumbersome and burdensome task if you're going across 35,000 servers, heterogeneous across the Unix, Linux environments, maybe Windows, maybe mainframe. Cross-platform connectivity is another issue. We need to go across Windows, Unix, Linux, mainframe. We need to be able to extend into network devices. You can't deploy an agent on a network device. You need to be able to access these devices transparently to eventually be able to manage SSH user keys on there. Also, the number of SSH variants out there are extensive. I mean, if you think there's an attachmate SSH, there's an F-Secure SSH, there's a Tectia SSH, there's Open SSH, there's Van Dyke SSH, there's Bitwise SSH. There are a lot of different variants of SSH, and these are all slightly different in terms of how you have to go out and discover and find the keys on these SSH. Traditional PAM does not solve the bypass challenge. We see over and over again, I come through my jump host in traditional privileged access management solutions. I go to that destination server. It doesn't stop me from dropping in new keys in that destination server, which I now have access to. Now I have the capability, because I have the private key, is I can access potentially from my desktop and bypass that jump host architecture there. This is one of the real challenges that face there with these type of architectures. Of course, that's a policy violation in the environment, but it doesn't mean that users are not doing this to gain access. So in a nutshell, we see that there's some significant challenges there where traditional PAM isn't really ideally suited to solve SSH user-based key challenges. Now, my privileged access management is well suited for the future. The myth number 3. Now, the way SSH looks at this is, if we think about the world of DevOps, which is emerging, access needs to be provisioned just in time. And essentially what we see right now is that we're going to repeat the same mess we've created in the past, also in the future in terms of key-based control. We have developers that they need access to resources very quickly, and they're pushing out their keys left and right. And again, the same issue. They leave, they move around, those keys are left there. Also, when those keys are provisioned, are we provisioning the right level of trust and access there? Do we now have trust across that process that shouldn't be at levels there where they now are being found using SSH user key-based access? So we have to take a consideration now about this is how traditional privileged access management solutions are going to help create that seamless transition from the legacy environment where SSH user keys have been managed in a really poor way over the last 15 years, and how we don't repeat that into the future. How do we actually make this whole process a dynamic process and be able to provision this access, this key-based access for interactive and machine-to-machine based usage on a just-in-time basis, agilely, but also remove it when it's no longer needed. And so we're going to talk a little bit about, in our last slide here, in a couple minutes, about how SSH is actually kind of helping customers address this problem. And at the end of the day, these need to all link in back into our overall identity governance framework, right? So we need to get this, where we talked about that gap in the beginning, where users are being provisioned, they're given username and passwords, but they don't look at the key. This all needs to get linked back into that identity governance provisioning access in our environments there, regardless of whether that's on-premise to on-premise. If it's going on-premise to the cloud, third party to the cloud, cloud to the cloud, right? And as we see these environments transform, and as we see DevOps come more and more into play, we're going to see this issue also become very much in the mainstream consideration from a risk perspective, a compliance perspective, and an automation perspective. So the way SSH looks at this, as you kind of considered, you remember that there's three circles linking there: identity access management, PKI, and configuration management. We see that identity access and data security are merging, because we have to have that encrypted access control as well as the key-based controls, as well as the configuration management. These combination here gives us the possibility to fill out the identity governance framework. Now, this is the Gartner identity governance framework here, right? And you have the core pieces here of account provisioning, access fulfillment, and currently it only says password management. This really needs to be extended to also look at other forms of credentials like SSH user keys, the access governance and access certification. Now, these bottom pieces are called the extensions. These are the pieces which Gartner scores solutions in the identity access management space which are strong, which have these additional extensions around risk scoring, segregation of duties, role management, role mining, audit case management, analytics. All these issues are absolutely relevant to SSH user keys. We need to be able to have analytics around our SSH user key-based usage, because we need to be able to find those anomalies there. We need to understand which roles are using SSH user keys. We need to understand there's a clear segregation of duty from development into production environments. We need to be able to score risk on our keys. We saw that that one key was able to reach 6,730 servers. So all these components related to the identity governance framework are relevant. However, the framework currently doesn't take into account the encrypted access control, cryptography, PKI, and configuration management. And so SSH actually sees these merging together, the identity access management and data security. They're going to start going hand in hand. So how do we transition from our past into our future? Now we're kind of looking forward into our world as we're transitioning our businesses into the cloud. We have a lot more third-party access, right? How do I gain visibility and control to begin with? And how can I make key-based access more dynamic controlled for agile environments? And how do I enable a real transition, not just a lift and shift type of scenario? And this is a big challenge, is that we see a lot of lift and shift. I'm just going to move my applications to the cloud, and now I'm in the cloud. Well, we just moved all of our problems over into the cloud. This is something we want to avoid as we make those transitions into our cloud environments. So over the last couple of weeks, we've talked about a process, right? One of the things we're going to talk about, I'm not going to really talk about the upper side, but I'm going to talk a little bit about the bottom parts there. There's a process which we can take a look at here, where we go out, the first thing we need to do is get the discovery, where we can get visibility into these trusts in the environment. We want to report on these to our management to show our management where the risks are, where these issues around segregation of duties are. We want to monitor key-based usage. We have to monitor. Without the monitoring, we're lost. We can't make recommendations as what needs to be remediated. From there, we need to lock down the access, essentially how keys are created in our environment. Right now, most of the time, it's just an ad hoc process, right? So we need to get that process under control, that they can only be created by certain individuals in the environment. From there, we have to remediate against our policy. In the majority of environments where we go to, an SSH user key-based policy does not exist in most places. But we need to start to develop that policy to be able to remediate that legacy access, which is a challenge, and ensure that new access being provisioned is under control. And then we need to start to consider how this is going to be integrated into our identity governance framework there. And then we can start to think about the nice things about the automation, about how I provision these keys automatically and how I automatically rotate things and automatically remove things and whatnot, right? So this actually comes very far down the line. Yes, if cost is our business driver, yes, we want to look at automating things as soon as possible. But the risk is really the initial driver out there because the risk is extremely high. And then we can move this into the governance side. Bridging the gap into identity, right? So we've talked about these. We've talked about the identity onboarding. We've talked about when accounts are being removed or when a role is being changed in the environment, right? We talked about how we want to have unauthorized key replacements and key expirations taken care of in a linkage between our identity access management system and our SSH Access platform. We need to understand the roles and identities and accounts which are being used with SSH user keys and be able to revalidate them with the appropriate application owners, business owners in the environment to make sure, should this access still be there in the environment? And only then have we really bridged the gap of that extension of password management to also take into consideration these SSH user key-based credentials. So over the last couple of weeks, SSH, we've talked a lot about the problem. We've talked about the myths here. We're going to take 2 slides to tell you about how SSH is looking at this. So SSH has been building a access management platform where we're bringing together these worlds of identity access management, PKI, and configuration management. And there's a couple of components you should take a look at on our website, time permitting. One is called the Universal SSH Key Manager. This is really the heart, which is solving the SSH user key management challenge in our customers' environments, which goes out, has the capability to discover, monitor these trusts, lock down the environment, remediate the legacy trust, and automate the life cycle for these SSH user keys and link this back in to the identity access management framework. Universal SSH Key Manager also manages the configuration centrally in the environment to help our customers standardize and get those security benefits and access control benefits that are needed to get this puzzle put together properly. Now, a second component of SSH's offering is managing this encrypted access control, this privileged access through encrypted tunnels, right? We talked about the challenges of the protocol, how the encrypted access is being misused, the challenges of the subchannels of the protocol, the challenges that our third parties are using this. And SSH has created a solution as part of this platform, which is a module called Crypto Auditor. Crypto Auditor is a really unique way in terms of how to monitor, control, and audit encrypted traffic, SSH, SFTP, RDP, and SSL traffic. It is done on an inline basis, meaning it's done through inspecting the traffic at a network level at a layer 2 or a layer 3 as an extension of your firewall. So you can basically just take policy-based routing off your firewall, funnel off that SSH SFTP traffic, and SSH has the capability to decrypt that traffic transparently with no agents required in the environment. So now linking this, if you're starting to link these stories together, Universal SSH Key Manager manages the keys, Crypto Auditor can transparently inspect this traffic. You can also manage the keys and vault those keys in Crypto Auditor, the private keys and the host keys, to be able to manage this access transparently if so desirable. And we look in the encrypted traffic there. And because we sit in line, we can actually control the subchannels of the protocol and eliminate some of these nasty things like the usage of tunneling. Now, there's 2 pieces that SSH has introduced into its portfolio. One is we have extended into the world of SSL certificate management, with CSS, our partners. And this allows us to provide our customers a more complete offering when they're approaching this challenge from the PKI perspective. So they can put a comprehensive single solution from the perspective of PKI with SSH key management and certificate management. And on the other side of configuration management, we like to partner with those configuration management players to be that underlying key management database and infrastructure and leverage their configuration management tools. And then the other tool that we brought in here is called SSH DevOps. It's another module. This is a tool which helps us make that migration from the legacy environment into the cloud transparently, managing the provisioning process and not creating the same challenge of the past. So the objective of the SSH DevOps tool is to ease legacy application transition to the cloud, as well as manage that DevOps access across the process flow. And it links right into the story of Crypto Auditor as well, because we also want to monitor and control that access that's being used through SSH in the DevOps environment. So these pieces all come together to bring together this triangle here of IAM, PKI, and configuration management. And I'm going to spend one slide here about this transition tomorrow and then we're going to close this up. Strategic resolution. So where SSH is taking this and following where we're going is we're looking at how do we take our customers on a journey from the past into the future by bringing our technologies together and being able to issue trust in a dynamic way, manage this access centrally. So bringing in our keys into centralized LDAP from our legacy environments as well as into our cloud environment so we can actually eliminate the problem of keys going forward in the long term. And our entire philosophy is driven around we want to do all this without disrupting our customers' business. We never want to be a single point of failure. We want you to be able to rip us out and life goes on. So all of the principles driven around our solution are always transparency and minimal disruptiveness to existing processes. There's always more information to learn about this. I learn every single day that I'm at SSH because I'm surrounded by really, really smart people, and it's just the tip of the iceberg. One of the great starting places are, if you don't have a policy in your environment, and this is something that you're learning about, is go check out the NIST IR 7966. This is the first authoritative guidance on the security of interactive and automated access management using Secure Shell. It is a free publication which can be found at the link below. What's up next? That was the end of the MythCrackers series, and you see my two little guys there. And as Ruben said, we have another set of exciting webinars coming up, which I'm really excited about, which are going to cover more about how we resolve the SSH user key management problem from a project perspective. What does a project actually look like? How do you get a project aligned? How do you structure a project? How do you architect a project? So that's one. And then we're going to be taking a whole series on looking at the encrypted access management challenges that relate into this access management space and link this PKI space to access management. So those are our next two areas, and our marketing team will be sending out invitations to those shortly. So with that being said, I'd like to thank you all for your attention and really appreciate you taking the time out of your busy work days to participate in this session today. Thank you.
Well, thank you very much, Matthew. Energetic and great information as always. We do have some excellent questions that have come through, so we do have time. I'd like to ask those on behalf of the attendees, and Joe or you, Matthew, if you could take the first one here. It's a question, I'm going to have to read it through a little bit, but it says, from a management perspective, how do you manage SSH keys with respect to issuing? Is it based on a group? Is it based on a user or some policy? So that's one question. It looks about key issuance and how is that handled, or how do we usually go about that, or what we recommend.
Go ahead, Joe.
Okay. Yeah, so I'll go ahead and take that one because I've been a part of some of these projects, and of course Matthew is involved as well. But it really depends on the company. But I mean, we like to, when we go in, and Matthew kind of touched on as far as the project life cycle and the project design and all of that kind of thing. It's something that we do on a regular basis, and of course it depends on the customer, but many of the customers like to go on an application by application basis, and maybe reporting on a key basis as well, but from an actual remediation and cleanup standpoint, we do see a lot of customers going by application, and there's some good reasons for that and to take into account. One of which is the people that you need when you're doing the cleanup, the people that you need to get sign-offs and approvals for will likely be similar or the same people if you go application by application. We've had some customers where the management is looking for overall server-based reporting and things of that sort, but from a project standpoint, we see a lot of customers going by application.
Great, thank you. I think that addresses the question. Another question that came through, and either for you, Joe, or Matthew, and I think this has to do with the second myth you were discussing about PAM solutions. And this came up, and I know you mentioned agentless, Matthew, but the question here is, you say needing agents on the traditional PAM, but then how do we go about it then if we don't use agents?
Sure. With our solution, with Universal SSH Key Manager, it is possible to deploy this in an agentless perspective, which means that what we do is we leverage between our key manager and those destination hosts the existing port 22 connectivity of SSH. And we essentially need a privilege elevated access, right? Ideally, customers don't let you access from your key manager's route to those servers. So we will elevate into sudo, or we could use, if it's a centrify scenario, we can use DZDo, or we can use a power broker, right? So we need a privilege elevated access. We can deploy a management key to those hosts for the initial scanning and basically go do this without having to deploy agents on the environment. We'll switch into that elevated user, and we'll go out and we'll scan the host for the needed information in terms of the users, private keys, the public keys, the host keys, the configurations, as well as the different variants of SSH that are out there.
Okay.
Alternatively,
go ahead, Joe.
So just also from the client, the crypto auditor side as well. I think Matthew mentioned it already, but I'll just reiterate that because we sit in line from a crypto auditor side, we can do our encrypted channel monitoring and things like that without agents needing to be involved, because we're actually sitting there. We have various different architectures where we can work with smart firewalls and things of that sort, where they'll pass us the SSH traffic, and then we do our analysis and things of that sort with DLPs and whatnot, and send the traffic back through the firewall itself. So in doing that, because we're in line like that, then we don't need an agent from the crypto auditor side either as well. So.
Okay, good. And then one last question we have, and then I think we can look to wrap this session up. And this one seems a bit technical in nature, but the questions here asked, you mentioned a number of overlooked aspects around SSH configurations. Can you provide a list of recommended configuration settings? This person must be pretty familiar with SSH. Who wants to take that one? Joe or Matthew?
Yeah,
Joe, that's your world.
Okay.
Okay.
Yeah, so we deal with that on a regular basis. I mean, even just from a support standpoint and things of that sort. But certainly, again, going back to the project, we work with companies to develop policies, not just around configuration, the configuration policies, but also the key policies and who should have access to what, and what types of restrictions you should be putting on your keys and things of that sort. We can certainly, if you contact us after the webinar, we can provide you some loose guidelines, but it really depends on a customer by customer basis. Certainly there are a number of configuration regulations that tie directly to some of the compliance regulations that are out there, like PCI and things like that. Like, you're not supposed to have direct root access to many of the systems, especially in PCI environments and things like that. So that's certainly a configuration setting that you might be in a violation of if you have that set up in your PCI environment. And we have all those mappings, so we can provide that to you if you reach out to us after the webinar.
Great. Well, that ends all of the questions. And again, I'd like to thank Matthew for your presentation today, Joe for your help and assistance in answering questions, and of course all of you for attending and taking the time out of your day to listen to what we have to speak to. As always, this session is recorded and will be put on SSH.com, so you can always get to it after the fact, and you can share that if necessary. And a teaser, as Matthew mentioned, we will be coming out with an additional set of series of webinars. And, we've talked a lot about, the myths around SSH keys, but now we want to start talking about the business implications and impacts and what we can help you with respect to undertaking an SSH key management project, whether it's risk reduction, staying in compliance, or, of course, going after the automation and integration that's needed with the various IDM frameworks that you might have. So please stay tuned for those. We will, of course, send emails and go out via our Twitter handle and the like and keep you all up to date. Thank you as always, and have a great day. This will end this presentation. Thank you.